The wind had a way of speaking on the high plains, a low, mournful whistle that carried through the gaps in the cabin walls and made the fire in the hearth gutter low. Inside, where the boards barely held back the cold, a woman sat with her arms wrapped tight around her knees, eyes fixed on the three small shapes lying under patched quilts. 6 days without real food had carved shadows into their faces. Their cheeks had sunk, their eyes dulled, and their movements slowed to the fragile shifts of creatures too weak to rise. She had tried to keep them strong. The first days, she had boiled bark stripped from the cottonwoods down by the creek, hoping its bitterness might fool their stomachs into thinking they had eaten. After that, she cut strips of old leather harness and boiled them until they softened enough to chew, though it gave no nourishment. Her youngest, just 6 years old, had swallowed too fast and retched it back up, his little body trembling with the effort. Now he lay still, his breath shallow, his lips cracked. Each sound he made struck her harder than any blow. Her name was Clara, 32 years old, skin pale and worn from sun and wind, hair once bright, but now tangled and dull, a widow 3 years now, and a mother who had learned to hold her grief silent, because the children looked to her as if she could still command life against the weight of death. She had not cried in front of them, not once, though her nights were soaked with it. Clara's husband, Samuel, had worked for the railroads, laying track in Wyoming territory. A misstep near Cheyenne had ended him, leaving her with debt, a patch of land that yielded little, and 3 children too young to fend for themselves. She had held on, season after season, patching clothes until they were threadbare, stretching flour into broth, and trading what she could for scraps. But this was the hungriest winter yet, and the neighbors, each as poor as the next, had none to spare. Now she sat with her gaze fixed on the ring she twisted round her finger. Gold, plain, save for a shallow engraving worn smooth with years. Samuel had slipped it onto her hand on a summer morning when the prairie had smelled of sage and promise. It was the last piece of him she had left. The children stirred in their sleep. Ruth, her eldest at 12, turned her face into the quilt and whispered something like a prayer. Thomas, 8, whimpered for bread in his dream. And little Aaron coughed weakly, a sound so frail it nearly undid her. Clara rose. The decision had taken root days ago, but she had resisted, clinging to that ring as though keeping it meant keeping Samuel. Yet what was a memory weighed against 3 living, starving children? Her throat tightened as she slipped it free. It left a pale band on her finger, a scar of devotion. She closed her hand around it and sat a moment longer in silence, listening to the steady beat of her heart, reminding herself she was still alive, and so were they. By morning she saddled the mule. Its ribs showed as sharp as her own, but it had strength enough to carry her to town. She bundled her shawl tight, kissed the children one by one, and told Ruth to keep the fire going, to keep her brothers warm. Their wide eyes followed her to the door. Aaron whimpered for her not to go, but she forced a smile and promised she'd return with food. Then she stepped into the knife-edge wind and pulled the door shut on their hollow faces. The road to town was a strip of frozen earth beaten hard by wagon wheels. Sagebrush rolled across the plain like lost souls. The sky stretched gray and endless, and Clara's hands ached as she held the reins. Her hunger gnawed at her belly. But it was nothing compared to the image of her children lying in that cabin, waiting. She pressed her lips together and urged the mule onward. By noon the shapes of buildings rose from the horizon, clustered like weary men against the sweep of prairie. The trading post stood at the center, smoke curling from its chimney. Beside it a saloon leaned crooked, and a row of stables stank of manure. Clara slid from the saddle and tied the mule, her legs stiff, her resolve burning. Inside, the post smelled of tobacco and sweat. Men stood near the counter, their hats low, their eyes shifting. A card game rattled at the back, laughter sharp as knives. The air carried suspicion. She felt it settle on her like a shroud the moment she stepped in. The ring was warm in her palm, though her hand trembled. The trader, a heavy man with whiskers thick as wire, looked her over with the disinterest of one who had seen too much misery to care. "What you need, Mrs. Carter?" he asked, voice flat. "I've come to sell." Her voice cracked. She held out the ring. The gold caught the lamplight, small but shining. "I need flour, beans, anything you can spare." The trader chuckled, a sound that turned heads. "That little thing? Ain't worth much." "It's gold," she whispered. "Gold don't fill bellies," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. Laughter rose from the card table. "I could give you a handful of biscuits, maybe some lard gone sour." Clara's cheeks burned. She felt the eyes of every man in the room pressing against her skin, stripping her bare. She wanted to vanish, but the image of her children's hollow faces held her still. "Please," she said, and the word tasted like ash. The trader smirked. "Please," she says. "Well, maybe I'll take pity." The voice cut across the room, low and steady, carrying the edge of steel. "You'll give her fair weight for it, Briggs. Or I'll see you eat those words." The laughter died. Heads turned. He stood near the doorway. Tall, shoulders squared beneath a dust-worn duster. His hat shadowed half his face, but the line of his jaw was hard, his eyes fixed on the trader, with a look that froze the air. A revolver hung low at his side, resting easy in its holster, but his presence made it clear he had no need to reach for it to be dangerous. Clara stared, caught between fear and something she could not name. The trader's face flushed. "Ain't your business, stranger." "It is now," the cowboy said. He stepped forward, slow and sure, like a man who'd walked into plenty of rooms and never had to explain himself. From his coat, he drew a small pouch, the clink of coins sharp in the silence. He laid them on the counter, silver enough to buy more than a handful of biscuits. He picked up the ring from Clara's trembling hand, but instead of pocketing it, he turned and pressed it back into her palm. His eyes met hers then, steady and unflinching. "Ma'am, you don't need to sell memories for bread." Her breath caught. The ring weighed heavier now, as if infused with some new meaning she could not yet understand. The trader grumbled but shoved the coins into his till. "Take your damn flour," then he muttered, throwing a sack onto the counter. The cowboy gathered beans, salt pork, and a loaf of hard bread besides, laying down more silver. Each clink was a rebuke to the men who had laughed. Not one of them spoke now. Clara's hands shook as she clutched the provisions. Relief and confusion tangled inside her until she could hardly speak. She managed a whisper. Why would you do this?" The cowboy gave no answer. He only tipped his hat, eyes never leaving hers, and said, "Because no child should cry for food while men sit fat in a saloon." The room seemed to breathe again, but Clara could not move. Her knees trembled, her throat closed, and she clutched the sack of flour as though it were life itself. The cowboy stepped aside, clearing her path. The men looked away, their laughter silenced, their pride wounded. Outside, the sky had turned the color of ash. Clara held her bundle tight, the ring pressing warm against her skin. She could still feel the weight of the cowboy's gaze, could still hear the quiet conviction in his voice. She did not know his name, nor what shadows walked behind him. But in that moment, standing on the hard earth with food in her arms, she knew this stranger had turned her fate. And yet, as she set her eyes toward the road home, one truth pressed heavy in her chest. Kindness on the frontier always came with a price. She would learn soon enough what his would be. The mule plodded slow along the rutted road, the sky bruised with low clouds that promised more snow before the night was done. Clara balanced the sack of flour and beans on the beast's back, holding her shawl close against the bite of the wind. Beside her walked the stranger, silent save for the creak of leather with each measured step. He carried the salt pork and bread himself, as if the weight meant nothing to him. She wanted to speak, to ask his name, to demand why he had done what no one else dared. Yet the word stuck. His presence unsettled her, not in fear, but in a way that stirred things she thought long buried. His eyes, gray, unyielding, seemed to look straight through, as though he had already measured the measure of her soul and found nothing to mock. When they reached the cabin, Ruth threw open the door, her thin face lighting with a joy Clara had not seen in weeks. The boys scrambled behind her, their small hands reaching, eyes wide at the sight of provisions. Clara set the sack down on the table, and the stranger laid his bundle beside it. The children crowded close, inhaling the smell of real bread as if it were heaven itself. Clara's throat tightened. "Go on," she urged. "Eat." They tore into the loaf, laughing and speaking over one another, crumbs scattering across the rough boards. Clara watched them as though she might never let the sight go. She turned to the stranger then, her voice unsteady. "You've given us more than food. I don't know how to repay." He shook his head, cutting her off. "Don't speak of payment. Just feed your young ones." His voice carried no softness, but there was a gravity to it that brooked no refusal. Clara pressed her lips together, nodding. Still, suspicion stirred beneath her gratitude. Out here on the edge of the plains, no gift came without reason. As night drew on, the fire cast long shadows against the walls. The children, bellies full for the first time in nearly a week, fell asleep quickly. Clara sat across from the stranger at the table. The ring, still warm from his hand, gleamed faintly in the firelight. She turned it over between her fingers, feeling the etching, remembering Samuel. The stranger watched her, expression unreadable. "Why did you stop him?" she asked at last, keeping her voice low, so as not to wake the little ones. The man leaned back, his chair creaking. "Didn't care to watch a man rob a woman. That traitor's been cheating folks for years. That can't be all." He did not answer at once. His eyes, shadowed by the brim of his hat, flickered to the fire. "Truth is, I got no use for gold. Not anymore. Figured that ring meant more to you than it ever would to me." His words struck deep. She studied him, searching for some mark of deception, but found none. His hands bore scars, his knuckles thickened from hard use. The revolver at his side was worn, as if it had known too many fights. Yet beneath it all was something else, loneliness, maybe, or a wound that never healed. "You've traveled far," she said. "Far enough." He leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Name's Cade." The sound of it lingered in the small cabin. She gave a faint nod. "Clara Carter. And these are Ruth Thomas and Aaron." His gaze softened almost imperceptibly at the children's names. Good strong names. Silence stretched, broken only by the crack of the fire. At last he stood, pulling his duster tight. "I'll take to the barn, sleep there tonight. Safer if I'm close by." "Safer?" He glanced toward the dark window. "Men in that town don't forgive easy. Briggs won't forget I shamed him. Neither will the ones watching." A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the cold. She wanted to argue, to say he was mistaken, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He was not a man given to imagining danger where none lurked. She nodded instead, gathering her shawl tighter around her. The storm broke in the night. Snow hissed against the roof, wind shrieking through the cracks. Clara lay awake, listening to the sound, thinking of the man lying alone in the barn. Sleep would not come. Images of Briggs's red face, of laughter at her expense, twisted with fear for what might come. She rose quietly, tucking the quilts closer around her children, and stepped outside. The barn was dim, the lantern low. Cade sat on a hay bale, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, his face unreadable. "You shouldn't be out," he said. "I couldn't rest." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you truly think they'll come?" He snapped the chamber shut with a practiced motion. "Men like that hate nothing worse than being made fools. They'll want blood, or at least silver back in their hands. Might not be tonight, but it'll come." Fear pooled in her stomach. She lowered herself onto a bale across from him, the hay prickling through her dress. "Then why stay here? Why bring that trouble to us?" He regarded her a long moment. "Because you and your young ones don't stand a chance without someone watching." The words landed heavy. He spoke not with arrogance but certainty. Clara realized then he had made some silent vow, though she could not yet understand why. The next day dawned bleak and white. Cade chopped wood outside while Thomas and Ruth fetched water from the creek. Clara busied herself with cooking beans over the fire. She caught herself humming once, startled by the sound after so long without song. Aaron laughed at some trick Cade showed with a stick and knife, and Clara paused, staring. For a moment, the cabin felt alive again. But unease lingered. When they rode into town for more supplies, Clara saw how men watched Cade, their eyes narrowing, hands straying near belts. Cade ignored them, moving with the ease of a man who had stared down too many threats to count. Clara felt the tension coil inside her, waiting for the snap. It came when they left the post. A tall man with a scar down his cheek stepped into their path. "Heard you think you're faster than Briggs's boys," he sneered. Cade's hand hovered near his revolver. His voice was calm, almost bored. "I don't think. I know." The man spat. "Best watch yourself. Ain't all of us as forgiving as Briggs." Cade's gaze never wavered. Forgiving wasn't the word I'd use for him. A murmur rose from bystanders. The scarred man stiffened, but Cade turned his back and walked on, daring the bullet that never came. Clara's heart pounded as she hurried to follow. That night, when the children slept, she confronted him by the fire. "Who are you really, Cade? You move like a soldier. You draw like one, too." He sat in silence a long while. Then, softly, "I was a soldier. Union cavalry. Fought more battles than I care to count. Buried my family when raiders torched our place in Kansas. Been wandering since." The confession hung heavy. Clara felt her throat tighten. She wanted to ask more, but the look in his eyes stopped her. Grief was a language she knew well enough not to press. "Then why help us?" she whispered. His gaze met hers, steady as ever. "Because I remember what it feels like to hear a child cry for food and know there's nothing you can do." Her chest ached. She reached for words, but none came. Silence wrapped them, broken only by the crack of firewood. The days that followed settled into a fragile rhythm. Cade worked like a man born to toil, splitting wood, mending the roof, fixing hinges. The children followed him, laughing, learning. Clara found herself watching, the weight in her chest easing, just enough to let her breathe again. But shadows lingered at the edge of the prairie. Twice she thought she saw men on the ridge watching. Once, footsteps crunched outside the cabin at night, then vanished into the storm. Cade grew more restless, keeping his revolver near. Then came the night it broke. Clara was dousing the fire when Cade froze, head cocked. He held up a hand. Outside, through the howl of the wind, came the faint crunch of snow beneath boots. "Many boots." He whispered, "Keep the children quiet. Stay low." Her heart slammed in her chest. She gathered Ruth, Thomas, and Aaron, ushering them beneath the table. Their eyes were wide, mouths open to scream, but she pressed her finger to her lips, pleading. They nodded, trembling. Cade slid to the window, revolver drawn. Shapes moved beyond the dark glass. 5, maybe 6 men, rifles slung, shadows stretching long. Clara clutched the ring in her fist, Samuel's memory burning in her palm, and knew the storm had finally come for them. The night air thickened with dread, the children silent as stone, as Cade's voice cut low, steady, and grim. "They've come for blood." And in that instant, Clara understood the kindness that had brought him here was also the curse that would test them all before dawn. Snow whispered against the window panes, a sound soft enough to hide the menace gathering outside. Cade crouched low, revolver steady, his gray eyes trained on the shifting shadows beyond the cabin wall. Clara clutched her children beneath the table, her heart hammering so hard she feared the intruders might hear it. The fire had burned down to embers, leaving the room in a gloom where every creak of the timber felt like a warning. Outside, a voice barked, rough, guttural. "Carter, send out the drifter, and we might let your place stand." Cade's jaw tightened. He gave Clara a quick glance, sharp and sure. "Don't move. Don't make a sound," he whispered. His voice carried the weight of command, born from years when disobedience meant death. Clara nodded, pressing her palm over Aaron's mouth to stifle his whimper. The men outside laughed, a coarse sound that sliced through the night. Boots crunched closer. Cade shifted to the door, his body tense as a drawn bowstring. The first shot came sudden, shattering glass, splinters raining down. Clara flinched, clutching her boys tight. Cade answered with a single crack of his Colt, and a cry split the darkness. Chaos erupted. Bullets tore through wood, thudding into the table, lodging into the hearth. The children huddled tight against Clara, who whispered prayers between gasps. Cade moved with ruthless economy. One shot, then another, each finding its mark. He had fought too many nights like this to waste a bullet. But there were more of them. Shapes darted past the windows, torches flaring, the smell of kerosene thickening in the air. Clara's stomach dropped. "They'll burn us out," she breathed. Cade's voice was iron. "Not if I end them first." He slid to the side window, shattered the glass with his revolvers, and fired into the torchlight. Another scream answered him, and the torch dropped into the snow, hissing out. But as he turned back, the door burst open. A hulking man stormed in, shotgun raised. Clara's scream lodged in her throat. Cade pivoted, firing quick, but the buckshot thundered first. Cade staggered, his shoulder torn back, crimson blooming across his duster. The giant grinned. Too late. Cade's bullet struck his chest, and he fell hard, choking on his own blood. Cade stumbled, one knee buckling, but his eyes never wavered. Clara surged forward, instinct propelling her. She pressed her shawl against his bleeding shoulder, her hands trembling. "Stay with me," she whispered fiercely. "Stay alive." Another shadow slipped inside, knife flashing. Clara's gaze caught the gleam, her body moving before her mind. She snatched the kitchen knife from the table and drove it forward, striking the man in the gut. His eyes widened in shock, the blade sinking deep. He staggered back, cursing, blood dark against his shirt before he collapsed. Clara froze, the knife slick in her hand, her breath ragged. She had never taken a life before. Yet, when she looked at her children's faces, pale and terrified, under the table, she knew she would do it again without hesitation. Cade caught her arm, his grip iron despite his wound. His voice was low, fierce. "You save them." The fight was not over. More boots thundered outside, more voices cursing. Cade forced himself upright, pressing his hand to his shoulder, revolver ready in the other. Clara rose beside him, knife clenched. For a heartbeat they stood together, back to back, two souls battered by life but unbroken. The men outside hesitated now. They had lost two, maybe three. Fear slipped into their curses. One shouted, "He's just one man, damn it. We'll finish him yet." Cade bared his teeth in something like a smile. "They're wrong," he muttered. The next rush came hard. Two men burst through, swinging rifles like clubs. Cade dropped one with a shot to the chest, then swung the butt of his Colt into the other's jaw. The man crumpled, teeth scattering across the floorboards. Clara darted forward, driving the knife into his thigh to keep him down. He howled, clawing at her, but Cade finished him with a merciful shot. Gunpowder thickened the air, acrid and choking. Clara's eyes watered, her hands sticky with blood. She wanted to collapse, to weep, but her children's whimpers steadied her spine. There could be no faltering now. At last, silence settled. The snow outside muffled the retreating steps of the survivors, their courage broken. Cade leaned against the doorframe, pale, sweat streaking his brow. Clara hurried to bar the door, dragging a fallen man's body across it for weight. Then she knelt beside Cade, pressing hard against his wound. "You're not dying here," she said, her voice fierce. His lips curved faintly. "You've got grit, Clara Carter, more than most men I've known. Save your breath." She tore strips from her dress, binding his shoulder tight. Blood seeped through, but the flow slowed. He hissed in pain, though his eyes never left hers. Dawn crept pale over the horizon, washing the prairie in ghost light. The children slept in a huddle, exhausted from terror. Clara sat beside Cade on the hearth, her hands still stained. Outside lay the bodies of men who had thought her cabin an easy prize. Inside, there was only silence, punctuated by Cade's uneven breaths. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, Cade stirred. "I should ride on," he muttered. "Men like Briggs won't quit. If I stay, I'll only bring more trouble." Clara turned to him, her eyes burning. "And if you leave?" You think trouble won't find us again? This land swallows the weak. I can't raise 3 children alone, not anymore. I need help. They need you. He looked away, jaw working. I'm no man for settling. Not after what I've done, what I've lost. Her hand found his, firm despite the tremor in her fingers. You've lost enough. Maybe it's time you found something worth staying for. Cade stared at their joined hands, the calluses of his palm rough against hers. For years he had carried only ghosts, drifting from town to town, never daring to believe in belonging. Yet here, in this battered cabin, with her children's soft breaths filling the air and Clara's eyes holding his, he felt a warmth he thought long dead. The children stirred, Ruth rising first. She blinked sleepily, then smiled at Cade. You didn't let them take us, she said, simply, pride in her young voice. Cade swallowed hard. He had not expected gratitude, least of all from a child. He reached out, ruffling her tangled hair, and for the first time in years, a faint spark of peace flickered within him. Clara rose, stepping to the window. Snow glittered across the plain, the sky clearing to endless blue. She slipped Samuel's ring back onto her finger, the gold catching the light. She had nearly sold it for bread, nearly let go of the last piece of her past. Now, holding it, she realized she did not need to choose between memory and survival. She could carry Samuel in her heart and still step toward tomorrow. Cade stood slowly, wincing at his wound but straightening nonetheless. He joined her at the window, gazing out across the prairie. The frontier's a cruel place, he said. Breaks a man before it ever makes him. Clara looked up at him, her voice steady. Maybe, but sometimes it gives back too. Maybe it gave me you. He met her gaze then, truly met it, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that life here would never be easy, but together they might yet carve a place where hope could live. The cabin was still battered, the land still unforgiving, and Briggs would not stay quiet forever. But Clara no longer felt the bone-deep despair that had haunted her. She had fought, and she had not broken. Neither had Cade. The children crowded close, their hands tugging at Cade's coat, their laughter small but real. For the first time in too long, Clara felt the sound of joy within these walls. She pressed her hand against her ring, the symbol of what she had lost and the reminder of what she still had. The fire crackled back to life, smoke curling toward the rafters. Outside, the prairie stretched endless, wild, and waiting. And within the cabin, a family newly forged from hunger, blood, and courage began again.